Are you sure you want to go out in person? Gabriel, my colleague, asked. Who else but me? I smiled. The model works. The clients are happy. The team is strong. Why should I hide? He nodded. For the first time, not as a subordinate, not as an assistant, but as a partner. We chose a simple presentation. No brands, no slogans. Just a case study. Optimization of services for 5 business centers in the Northern District, within 6 weeks, without changing the budget, with a 17% increase in efficiency. And at the very end, the caption, implemented by the Maple North Ops team, led by Lauren Baines. I went on stage. My hands were not shaking. My heart was not pounding. I was calm. Almost ordinary. Meredith was sitting in the front row, her eyes stony, but not angry, but protective. She knew that today was the day when what she had built not with words, but with exclusions, would collapse, name by name, position by position. Someone once told me that my methods were outdated. I started straight away, without introductions. But no system becomes obsolete if it works. Only the masks get old. Today, I do not represent a corporation. I represent an approach, an experience, a team. The idea that quality does not need a brand book. It needs people who do not betray themselves. There was no applause after the presentation. There was silence. The same one I felt in my office when I was fired. But now it belonged to me. In the corridor, a gray-haired man in a suit with a controlling operations badge approached me. Were you at Westcraft in 2009? Yes. I remember your root system. We're still using it, only in a new interface. Thank you, I replied. And then he added, if you ever need a partner, let me know. I trust you where you are. In the evening, my team and I gathered not in a restaurant, not in a co-working space. It was in an old warehouse that now served as our office, without a sign, no reception, but with a big map on the wall, and an inscription in felt-tip pen. No structure is stronger than the one built on respect. I didn't win. I came back, and now I can build not from scratch, but finally correctly. On the first day after leaving, I was in no hurry to respond to messages. I didn't open my mail. I didn't look at LinkedIn. I didn't make a plan. I just went to the market. I bought yellow plums, the ones that crack to the touch but hold a honey core inside, and green basil, sharp and bold, like the first word after silence. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but that's exactly why I bought it. Because for the first time in a long time, I could afford not to have a clear plan. I sat down on a bench by the river with a notebook. Not to write something down. I just had it at hand in case the silence wanted to say something important. And I finally allowed myself not to prove it. Not to anyone. Not even to myself. I knew that everything would be different. Waves would come. Disappointment, doubt, anger, and maybe even emptiness. But I gave the first wave a different name. Not reaction. It was memory. I allowed myself to remember, not with idealization, not as a victim, not as a heroine, just honestly. What I did, what I left behind, because that's what they were going to optimize, my work, my systems, my decisions. Halberd in 2014 and Halberd in 2023 were 2 completely different companies, and I saw them both. I was a witness, and I was a creator. In 2014, they were teetering on the brink. One of the main clients, a medical supply chain, was already preparing documents to terminate the contract because of delays, because of the chaos in logistics, because their business was breaking down, because our forecasts were not working. The data was entered manually, Excel was crying under the weight of thousands of tabs, and every day was a roulette with human errors. And I was a nobody back then, just a data coordinator, without an office, no access to strategic meetings. But after 6, when the management hid behind the coffee machines and went to think it over again, I stayed. And I started building something, without a blessing, without a budget, without a mandate. Just because I couldn't watch everything fall apart. It was not a revolution. It was math, logic, and a little common sense. I called it OSM, Operational Stream Matrix. It was a system that allowed to see volumes in real time, predict congestion before it became critical, and reduce the processing time of applications by 17%. Not a fairy tale. It's not a disrupt. It's just order. And Halberd brought this order to the table. Only after that did my office appear. Not because I demanded it, but because the then CEO said so. Make it a standard, in all departments. And I did. He doesn't work here anymore. He left 2 years ago. Burnout, kids in college, new life, and I stayed. Not for praise, not for the sake of positions, but because I believed in the cause, in the team, in the very possibility of order. And I did not expect applause. But, to be honest, I was expecting at least to be remembered. Instead, I received a phrase that I still hear in my head with the same intonation. You are a very valuable specialist, just a little too expensive for our new strategy. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't make a scene. I remembered. I remembered how I was thanked at night when the system pulled the company out of a technical stop. I remember how the heads of other departments asked for my templates because everything works like a Swiss watch. How I was asked to present the project to investors because you have something that inspires trust. As a client once said, I stay with Halberd only because of the woman who talks to me not as a manager, but as a person who really sees my numbers. It wasn't heroics. It was my way of working, my responsibility, my presence. And so, when I was offered to stay, but for less, it was not an insult. It was a mistake, because I am not a cost. I am an asset, just an asset that they temporarily forgot about. But it's okay. I will remind them. And I'll do it the way I always do, calmly, accurately, and without a single extra tab in Excel. The call came from an unfamiliar number, a long one with a Canadian code. I looked at the screen and almost pressed reject. I thought it must be an advertisement or another automated offer to change mobile operators, but something in those numbers made me freeze. Not rationally, but intuitively, like a feeling that it was not just a coincidence. I didn't accept it right away, but 5 minutes later I called back. Martha, is that you? I heard a voice. Yes, I'm listening, I answered cautiously. This is Kevin from Trilogis. We worked together back in 2018. You pulled our supply chain back when everything was going to hell. Do you remember? I do remember. He was a young manager who did not have time to master all the nuances, but he was honestly learning on the go. Yes, I remember. I wanted to know, are you still at Halberd? I paused, not out of doubt. It was just the first time in all these days that someone had addressed me, not as a position or a former employee, but as me, as Marta, as a person with whom they worked. They remembered me, and now they were looking for me not from the protocol, but from memory. No, not anymore, I answered in a flat tone. You know, maybe it's for the best. He smiled into the phone. Because I have something interesting for you. We're about to start restructuring, and we're not looking for a fancy slide deck consultant. We need a person. Are you free for coffee? And that was just the first conversation. The next week, I got an email from Anne at Carrick Mills. Just like that, without foreplay. I saw the news that you are no longer at Halberd. Would you like to see what we're doing with the request processing registers? We're in chaos there, and we need a head that doesn't get lost at the word redistribution. The next day, I received a message from Lauren. She used to be an accountant at Sonora Freight, and now she is a government project coordinator in the logistics sector. And she had one simple sentence. We need to redo the entire flow here for the new budget. I know only one person who will not get confused, you. All these people. They didn't wait for me to update my resume. They didn't ask if I had any certificates. They didn't go through recruiters. They just remembered what it was like to work with us. How I didn't complicate things where they should have been simple. How I didn't shift responsibility. I didn't play office politics because I chose to work. And suddenly I realized something important. I wasn't looking for a new job. I didn't even open a document with a CV. But I already had capital. Invisible, unformalized, professional, reputational, and most importantly, trust. Not from HR, but from those who really pay. Those who are responsible to their partners, to the budget, to the business. I opened an old folder on my laptop. It was simply called Technical Drafts. I used to keep it for myself, not for reporting purposes. There were alternative models that I used to build when Halberd failed, scenarios in case of capacity shortages, workarounds that worked without investment, charts that I once developed on a weekend because no one wanted to redo the structure again. At the time, I thought that these materials were for Halberd, but now I realize that they were for me. Because this time, I'm not giving them away for nothing, not for the good of the company, not in exchange for a modest, basic salary with a bonus for results. This time, I know what I'm worth, and this time, I dictate the rules of the game. I made coffee, not because I wanted to, but because I was used to it. Everything starts with coffee, even changes, even rebellions, even new life. The coffee maker rattled with an old familiar sound, a little cracked, a little imperfect, just like me at that moment. I poured the ground coffee into the filter, turned on the kettle, and slowly typed in the search engine. LLC Create Online. Next to me was an old ceramic mug, one of those that used to be part of the Halberd corporate welcome package. It was white, with a blue logo that had already faded a bit from years of washing. I picked it up and smiled. It used to be the pride of the brand, and now it is my souvenir. A symbol of the era I grew up in, like a t-shirt from university that you keep not because of the fabric, but because of the memories. I came up with the name quickly, Lane Ops. Lane is like a narrow, unpretentious path that not everyone can see, but which always leads to the right place. Ops, because without an operational brain, even the smartest strategies remain just PowerPoint slides. I entered my address in the registration form, and in the office field I wrote honestly, temporarily, remotely. In reality, it was the kitchen, my new headquarters, my new decision-making center, my territory of action. I took the phone off the table and called the first person I trusted without a doubt. Carly? Oh my God, Martha, I just found out. Are you free now? I don't want your sympathy. I want your brain. Carly was someone Halberd was afraid to even mention out loud, because she knew everything, how information flows, where applications were lost, why the system freezes every Thursday at 4:40 p.m. She was not from the pretend team, but from the do team. She arrived in 30 minutes. She walked into my kitchen, took off her shoes, picked up a cracked cup, and sat down at the table, looking at my old laptop like a treasure map. I've long dreamed of working under a person, not a logo, she said. For once, to do something that doesn't get lost between concept and brand. I nodded silently, and we started. Devin joined us. I remembered him from 2017. He was the one who saved the supply when the system was down, and he just wrote to everyone on Viber, "What do you need?" No CRM, no briefings, no bureaucracy, just common sense. He walked through the door with a bag of coffee and a thermos. If you have a plan, I have a thermos. We held our first meeting with a potential client in Zoom. 3 people at a kitchen table littered with wires, notebooks, and cups. No WeWork-style background, no filters, just us. Do you have a website? They asked. Not yet, I answered. But we have experience. And a system that I created before Halberd even knew what logistics optimization was. And how much will you charge to launch a regional warehouse? I didn't blink. I named the amount. It was 20% less than Halberd would have charged. But honest, a decent one, taking into account the cost of every night without sleep, every crisis I had already lived through. We have a deal. Send the contract tomorrow. I nodded. Carly wrote it down in her notebook. By the way, with a pen with the Halberd logo. We laughed then. Like, now it's our pen, our brand, our laugh. I printed the contract on an old printer that kept shifting the last line. I added the number by hand. We signed it. Because, as it turned out, when you don't pretend to be a big company, but just act like a big person, that's enough. Late in the evening, when Carly left and Devin fell asleep with his laptop on his lap, I cleaned up the cups. The water was not very hot, the dishes were not very clean, the printer was beeping, and I stood in the middle of the kitchen and suddenly realized, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm starting with experience, and this is completely different. The morning started with coffee, a notebook, and an empty Google Docs. No plans, no templates, just a blinking cursor, as if to say, shall we start from scratch? The folder on my desktop was called Lane Ops, and now it no longer sounded ironic. Not, let's call it that and see what happens. It sounded like something that had a shape, a volume, a meaning. All Marta had at that moment was an old laptop, home Wi-Fi, which sometimes knocks out Zoom, and people. Her own backbone. 2 trusted ones. The real ones. Clara, a former analyst at Halberd. She left after the same restructuring, but not with resentment, with a clear internal agreement. I won't be here anymore. And Dylan, the best techie who saved logistics automation in 2018 and then lost everything in one morning email during the pandemic. Position reduced. Neither of them asked what they were paid. They just said, "Let me know if you have a job. We're in." And the work started. The 3rd client in a week. The phone rang, and Marta picked it up. Lane Ops, good afternoon. And for the first time, it didn't sound like an experiment. It sounded like a real name for a living system. A name that breathes. That works. Which holds on to those who did not break when everything around them fell apart. The kitchen became the headquarters. The laptop stood right on the table, where yesterday there was an uneaten salad and old soy sauce. Clara was working with headphones on. Her eyebrows danced with the numbers on the screen. Sometimes she took off the headphones and threw them through the coffee steam. The schedule is perfect. Just tighten up the logistics, and we'll be a rocket. Dylan, as always, kept the code on his iPad and wrapped the charger with tape, his personal ritual before a big task. "If the charger holds, the system will hold," he said, smiling. A little crooked, but sincere. The site was assembled in 2 evenings using a free website builder. 3 buttons, about us, services, contacts, not a single case study, no leading expertise or innovative solutions. Just 1 sentence on the homepage, "We help those who work." And surprisingly, it was enough. People signed up. The first contract was received on the 6th day after the mail was launched. It was small but clear, and on the 9th I received a request for technical support from a new company. But the client was familiar. Halberd, the former giant, former home. Martha opened the brief. She read it slowly. She looked for details, and she came across a note at the end. Allow subcontractors to perform internal tasks under NDA. She put her cup down. She took a breath, slowly, not out of shock, out of realization. They had just returned to Halberd, but not as part of it, as a subcontractor. Lane Ops is a new partner in the chain, and Halberd does not even suspect, for now. Irony? No. It was a comeback, at a new level, in a new role. When Marta opened the first performance report she received as part of the project, she knew what to expect. But still, something in her chest moved. The same colors in the tables, the same structure, the same formulas. They used her system. Her former product, now with a new neon font, a changed logo, and 0 attribution. Her work was still working. But not at Halberd anymore. This time it was for Lane Ops. And this time, for her. Nothing has changed in the Halberd lobby. The same white glossy panels shining artificially like smiles on Monday. The same receptionists who didn't even look in my direction when I spoke. External consultant, Lane Ops, 2 o'clock. 2. I was shown into a room I remember better than my own living room, where I used to lock the door after 10 in the evening to finish a dashboard, where I first introduced the very optimization model that later saved the company in the crisis of 2014. Now I sat down not as part of the team, but as a new structure brought in to revise the old system. This was officially stated in the brief. I was to lead the presentation. In the room were project managers, the COO, and Justin. He clearly didn't expect to see me. But he didn't say anything. He silently opened his laptop. I took a breath. I pressed the clicker. We've adapted your current system without disrupting your usual routines. However, we have made a number of improvements, reducing duplicate processes, automating change processing, and, most importantly, an adaptive module for remote regions. It adjusts to unstable deliveries without manual intervention. Some of the team nodded. Others remained silent. Justin kept his eyes on the screen. Finally, when I stopped, he looked up. You were at Halberd, right? I created this system. It was called a crisis pilot back then, I said calmly. Why am I learning about this here? Because you didn't ask. His face changed. The calmness disappeared from his corporate mask, and all that was left was an attempt to compose himself. Did you go through the contractor on purpose to show off? No, I didn't. You signed the contract yourself. Lane Ops didn't hide. We just didn't shout. One of the analysts asked us carefully, "Does this mean that we are already working with your old system, but in an updated form?" I nodded. Actually, you are working with an updated version of it, which is already 20% more efficient. Only this time, it's not yours forever. The silence lingered, and there was no anger in it. Only a silence in which respect grew. I closed the laptop. This is the end of our part. Thank you for your time. Lane Ops is ready for the next phase. If you are still here, you are ready to work. I left the room the same way I came in, without my badge, but with something much more valuable. The first signal came not from the office, but from the market. The tender in which Halberd was the favorite was cancelled. Their client withdrew the bid without explanation. It was just a strategic pause. But I knew that this time the strategic pause had a name. Lane Ops. The next day, another letter. This time it was from a logistics company I had worked with back in 2017. They remembered me. They asked for a consultation, open, transparent, and no more hints of intermediaries. It was us they wanted. The three of us were sitting in the kitchen, me, Clara, and Thomas. The latte was already cold because no one wanted to interrupt the conversation for the microwave. "This is the third one this week," Clara flipped through her tablet. "They're talking to each other," Thomas added. "Someone started a rumor that we have better optimization than Halberd, and it's, really working." I smiled. Not a big smile, but honestly, it's not a rumor. It's the truth. Meanwhile, things were getting hot in the Halberd office. I was sent a screenshot of an internal email. Cases of losing contracts have become more frequent. We are asking analysts to collect data on competitors who have emerged recently. One of the items was bolded. Lane Ops, a new company probably formed from former employees. Aha! It finally came through. But instead of an attack, there was silence. Justin didn't write. He didn't call. Apparently, he was still thinking about how to play it off, how to save face. But the market doesn't wait for someone to catch up. It just moves on. And we were already ahead. Lane Ops became noticeable. Not through PR, not through high-profile campaigns. It was the effect, because of the result. And the most interesting thing is that customers themselves started sending feedback. A post from the CEO of one of the partners appeared on LinkedIn. "The best solutions are those that don't require advertising. We just saw the difference. Thanks to Lane Ops." I looked at this sentence for a long time, and something switched inside me. "We're ready," I told Clara, "to go public. It's official, openly, without intermediaries, without a shadow." She smiled. "You mean a website, cases, history, vision, and my personal page, with a name and a voice, because I don't need silence anymore." This invitation could have easily been lost among the usual corporate trash cans. The inbox was full of emails like new automation tools, check the dashboard for updates, webinar, SEO in the B2B industry, standard topics, empty words, but this topic was short. Industry Resilience 2025, official invitation to participate. I clicked without expectations. I read it, and read it again, slowly. And only then, after a few seconds, I realized that I was not invited as an ex-Halberd, not ex, not independent consultant, in parentheses, looking for new opportunities, but as Marta Lane, the founder of Lane Ops, without the quotation marks, no doubts, just as an expert, as a force. I took a sip of cold coffee. I turned to Clara, who was sitting at the kitchen table, checking the numbers. Conference in London, a panel with CEOs, and me, as an independent expert. "And you're going?" "I'm not hiding anymore, Clara. I'm going." On the day of the performance, I didn't put on a new suit. I didn't buy anything to impress. I wore a dark blue short-sleeved shirt and a watch that was over 10 years old. The glasses scratched, but it goes on just fine, just like me. I didn't have to look new, because I wasn't new. I was a survivor, who endured, who grew not from ashes, but from indifference. There were 5 people on the stage, 3 CEOs, clean-shaven, with fresh PowerPoints in their heads, a German analyst with glasses in a frame that seemed to be specially matched to his LinkedIn photo, and me. They said my name calmly, succinctly. Marta Lane, founder of Lane Ops. She is an independent operational security consultant. The room was big, more than 300 people, faces I knew from the past, from conferences 10 years ago. A few looks lingered, a few recognized. And then the moderator, a woman with a keen sense of tension in the air, asked the first question, straight to the point. Miss Lane, why do companies lose in times of crisis, even if they have the resources? I didn't take a deep breath. I didn't look for a phrase. I just answered. Calmly, as a person who saw where things really broke down. Because they do not consider silence a value, because they listen to the loud ones, because they don't ask themselves, who held the structure together while the market was bursting at the seams? A slight tension swept through the room. Someone started writing something down. Someone just fell silent. I have seen systems collapse not because of finances, not because of the numbers, but because no one knew who kept the doors from drafts. You remove the person who was doing it, and a month later the system collapses. And it's too late to look for the why. I paused. It was not a drama, it was a statement. You can replace roles, but you cannot replace experience. And experience is not grown from a beautiful resume. It is born at night when no one called, but she still came and saved you, and you didn't write it down, because you only measured reports. And then there was applause, not polite applause, real applause, with that second delay when the audience does not applaud but agrees. And then there was the backstage. These conversations over coffee, in the corridors, where more is decided than on stage. And for the first time in many months, I was not on the defensive. I didn't have to explain why I left Halberd or prove that I was still in shape. I was on my own field. I was asked about cases, about the structure of Lane Ops, about the value of invisible roles, about the market that is breaking down, and why it is necessary to listen to those who have not been heard before. And not once, did anyone ask, why are you no longer at Halberd? Because it didn't matter anymore. They knew where I was, and most importantly, they knew who I was. Did you see that? Clara burst into my office before we had coffee. What? I looked up from the report on the new client from Warsaw. Halberd, official blog. A post about reassessing the role of operational support in the modern management structure. And you know what? They quoted your method, without mentioning your name, without mentioning Lane Ops, but literally. And they also concluded that such strategic advice from the outside no longer works. I clicked on the link. The article was sterile. Formally, it was analytics. In fact, it was a blow, and not in emotion, but in the reputation. A subtle, cold one. Marta Lane was not mentioned, but everyone who had ever worked at Halberd in the last 10 years knew it was about her. I wasn't overcome with anger. I wasn't afraid. I was even a little embarrassed for them. Are we going to answer it? Clara asked. Yes, but not through a blog. We will formalize what should have been done a long time ago. I opened the draft. Lane Ops Operational Architecture, Author's Vision and Case Study. And for the first time, I wrote not as a consultant, but as the owner of the system, not about the past. It was about the model we implemented and which worked, with dates, with examples, with documents that were no longer NDAs, everything that already belonged to me, legally and morally. In the evening, I published a post on LinkedIn, without attack, without regret. It was simple. 10 years ago, I created a framework that reduced risks by 38% at Halberd Logistics. Back then, my name was at the bottom of the protocols. Now it's on the first page of the case study. I am grateful to everyone who is not afraid to work quietly. It's time to speak up. #LaneOps, #operational integrity, #authors matter. In 4 hours, 7,800 views, 1,200 reactions, comments from analysts, private messages asking for advice. And in the morning, a letter from Halberd's legal department. Be careful. in the form of a request to clarify the scope of the author's contribution to the Operational Analytics System 2014 to 2017. They were not afraid of me, but of a precedent. I responded through a lawyer. Everything was in line. No complaints. But with reference to public mentions of the system, a patent for the methodology, and a contract that did not provide for the transfer of rights. Now everything was on the table, and while Halberd was silent, the world was already talking. The tender was announced unexpectedly in the last week of the quarter. It was a public sector program that had previously been consistently taken by large corporations such as Halberd, ArianLog, and Croven Systems. It was a 4-year project with more than $12 million in the budget and a publicity that was hard to ignore. I read the terms and conditions, the prototypes, the schedule, and I knew we could do it better, calmer, smarter. "Are we going to the tender?" Clara asked. "Yes, but not as Lane Ops. We are creating a new unit. It will look like a fresh consulting structure. A young brand, no mention of Halberd or even me." "Why not under your name?" "Because it's not about me anymore. It's about letting ideas live on, without my shadow." We created the Aurelia Analytics brand, a name without any association with the past, a new website, a new email, a presentation structure built from scratch. The only trace is our way of thinking. On the day of the submission, I pressed send and did not mention Halberd even once, because there was no need to. 3 weeks later, when the results came in, I opened the PDF and saw, "Selected contractor, Aurelia Analytics, Munich office." I put the laptop down, and only then did I allow myself to smile. Not because we had beaten Halberd, but because they didn't even realize who they couldn't beat. A few days later, I saw the news. Halberd was not selected due to non-compliance with the terms of reference. Again, the familiar wording that I had once created myself. And in the evening, I received a letter from Justin. "Martha, I'm guessing it's you. If so, it was beautiful. If not, congratulations anyway." I didn't answer. In December, we signed a contract with Aurelia. I was hired as a senior strategic advisor. Publicly, I was not a manager, but everyone who needed to know knew. The same week, Halberd removed the mention of its new risk management system from its website. Instead, there was silence. And it wasn't even revenge. It was correcting a mistake, a strategic one, without any extra noise.